All right, today we are diving into something really fascinating. We're going to decode a symbol that, believe it or not, is much more than what it seems. We're talking about a flag that's also a formula. So take a look at this. At first glance, it probably looks like a flag you've seen before, right? But what if I told you that the source document we're digging into today describes this not just as a symbol, but as a complex formula? Yeah, you heard that right. Let's decode this thing together. Okay, so to even begin to understand this so-called formula, we've got to start with the basics. We need to look at its surface level design, which is, well, a familiar symbol, but with a twist. So on the left, you've got the historical Canadian flag. Super iconic, right? The single maple leaf. And on the right, that's the one we're focused on, what our source text calls the provisional flag. Now, you can see it keeps the red and white, it keeps the maple leaf theme, that's all for continuity. But the big change, the absolutely crucial change, is the jump from one leaf to three. And trust me, that's where all the deeper meaning really kicks in. So the big question is, why three leaves? What's the deal with three? Well, according to the source material, everything revolves around this number. And how it all unfolds is, well, it's pretty surprising. And here's what's really fascinating. The source text doesn't just give us one reason. Oh no, it describes four totally distinct layers of symbolism for these three leaves. We're going to break down every single one: the philosophical, the biological, the mathematical, and finally, the historical. All right, first up, let's tackle the most abstract layer of meaning that our source material presents. This is the big philosophical idea behind the whole design. So the core idea here is something called the Hegelian dialectic. It sounds complicated, but think of it just like a debate or a conversation. You start with one main idea, right? That's the thesis. Then someone comes along with a totally opposing idea. That's the antithesis. And out of that conflict, that back and forth, a new, better idea emerges that kind of takes the best of both. That's the synthesis. So you might be asking, why on earth would you embed that in a flag? Well, the idea is to represent a nation's ability to resolve its own conflicts and just evolve. So how does this actually apply to the flag we're looking at? Well, according to the source, those two lower leaves, they represent a fundamental tension. On one side, you've got the thesis, freedom, and directly opposing it is the antithesis, control. And the document even notes that this idea of control is getting amplified by modern technology. And this is where it all comes together. That higher central leaf, that's the resolution. That's the synthesis. It represents what the source describes as a new meritocratic order, one that aims to solve that exact conflict between freedom and control, all while preserving heritage and, well, freedom. Okay, let's switch gears a bit. The next layer of symbolism is the biological one. And what's cool is that it actually mirrors that same philosophical idea we just talked about. Moving from a conflict between lower primal functions to a higher, more reasoned resolution. The source actually puts forward two different biological interpretations. The first one is based on the triune brain model. The idea here is that our brain has three main parts: the primal reptilian part, the emotional limbic system, and the logical neocortex. So in this view, the two lower leaves represent our primal instincts, while that top leaf, that's our higher reason. Then there's a second interpretation. This one sees the side leaves as the left and right hemispheres of the brain, and that central leaf, that represents the pineal gland, which some see as a point of integration or higher consciousness. Okay, if you thought that was intricate, hold on. This is where things get, well, even weirder. The source claims there's a hidden code literally embedded in the flag's geometry. It calls it a code in the cosmos. So buried in the geometry of this flag are very specific numbers. The first one is 23.44 degrees. Now, why that exact number? It's not random. The source claims this is the angle of the two lower stems, and it's designed to precisely match the Earth's axial tilt, specifically as of the year 2026. The second number to know is 51.83 degrees. This is the upward angle of those side leaves. And again, this is not random at all. The source says it's derived from the golden ratio. That fundamental mathematical constant that pops up everywhere in nature? It gets to this number through a specific shape, known as a Kepler triangle. And you can see exactly where those angles are supposed to be right here. Look at the geometric lines overlaid on the flag. It basically turns this symbol into a kind of mathematical diagram, one that connects it directly to the planet itself. Pretty wild. Okay, so we've covered philosophy, biology, and even some cosmic math. The fourth and final layer of meaning that the source talks about, well, it ties all of these huge ideas back down to something more specific, a synthesized identity. So the source applies that same three-part structure, that thesis, antithesis, synthesis thing, to Canadian history. The two side leaves are said to symbolize the English-speaking and French-speaking founders. And that central leaf? That's described as representing their synthesis into what the text calls a new Canadian ethnicity, founded in European heritage. So the big takeaway here is that all these layers, the philosophical, the biological, the mathematical, the historical, they're all meant to combine to send one single unified message. The source document puts it all together like this, and I'll just quote it directly. The provisional flag expresses commitment to rational synthesis, higher human potential, preservation of heritage, and enduring freedom in the modern era. And that leaves us with a final big question. We've just unpacked 4 layers of some seriously dense symbolism, all embedded in a single design, and all coming from one specific source. It kind of makes you step back and wonder, right? What is the true purpose of any national symbol? Is it just to reflect a simple shared identity that everyone can get behind? Or could it be to encode a complex, maybe even a forward-looking formula? That's something to think about.